West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
My next guest was a key witness in Donald Trump's first impeachment trial, testifying about Trump's pressure campaign to get Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden. Retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Col Vindman joins me now. He's the author of the book Here, Right Matters, An American Story. Great book, very successful book. Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, thanks so much for being with us. The very thing that you said during Trump's first impeachment, he did again after his 2020 loss. Instead of pressuring Ukraine, he was pressuring the Department of Justice. He was pressuring election officials in places like Georgia. Both times he faced no legal or political consequences. And as we were just talking about with Ellie a few moments ago, there's all this hesitancy and trepidation, I suppose, to haul him in front of the January 6th committee. It seems like this works out for him every time. At some point, Colonel Vindman, doesn't somebody just have to stand up to him? You know all about that.
Well, absolutely. And I think individual actors have and maybe have suffered some of the consequences, but they've served the U.S., the general public good. I think what ends up happening is if Trump and his cronies are not held accountable, this becomes a rehearsal for a future insurrection. We need accountability to deal with the crimes, the criminal activity from the previous administration, to be able to expose the big lie of stolen elections, to expose the president's wrongdoing, to expose the corruption of his proxies. And if we do that, we could start chipping away at the big lie. We could start bringing this country back together, and with that, move ahead. Without accountability, we can't do that.
Yeah. And I think people at home see how Trump's allies are trying to stonewall these proceedings. They see Steve Bannon doing it right now. They wonder, what is the point of this process if it's so easy to get around it? I mean, what's the point of issuing subpoenas? Why do these congressional subpoenas exist if you can just toss them by the wayside and ignore them? Do you think our institutions are built to withstand these types of tactics?
I don't think so. And I think in part what we've experienced the past 4 years, and maybe even longer, is that the legislative branch has ceded some of its authority. It's ceded its role as a check on executive power. And I think that this is an opportunity for the legislative branch to assert its role in the constitutional process, hold the former president and other officials accountable, that is both through the subpoenas and through an exposure of what happened, bring the facts out into the light about January 6th. The other thing is, in reality, this is also a political endeavor. And it exposes that this president, this former president, President Trump, was a corrupt actor that continues to try to steal the election that he lost, which is pretty amazing. Now now it's also in the hands of the American public. We have an election in less than a few weeks. And what I think we need to do is we need to take a look at those people that the president supports, those Trump acolytes, those other actors that have proven themselves to be compromised. Actually, they've marked themselves with the scarlet letter of President Trump's approval, and we need to make sure that those folks do not make it into into office. And that's why one of the reasons I've supported Terry McAuliffe against Glenn Youngkin. Glenn Youngkin is a Trump acolyte. He supports the former president's policies with regards to denying the severity of COVID, denying January 6th insurrection, denying propagating this idea of a stolen election, and we can't have that. He's actually in the state of Virginia. He's a non-viable candidate. It's just a matter of the population showing up and making their voices heard.
I do want to ask you a little bit about that in just a moment, but just to button this up on January 6th, if you were advising the January 6th committee, would you advise the committee to issue a subpoena for Donald Trump to testify, cooperate with that investigation?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And now I have the privilege of doing that because I'm not an attorney, don't have to understand all the difficulties there. But on the same note, the president should be brought to justice. He's not above the law. I felt that was the case when I reported presidential wrongdoing and presidential abuse of power. And if he lies in front of the commission, then he should suffer the consequences. The problem is that he has not suffered the consequences. He did not suffer the consequences of an abuse of power in the first impeachment that led him to believe that he could act with impunity, mismanage COVID, attempt to steal an election into the future. And also in the second, and after the insurrection, he was not held accountable. What discourages him from continuing to behave as a future authoritarian leader, attempting to entice Republican state governments from introducing legislation that allows them to overturn the will of the people that vote in one direction? We need accountability. It's an open wound. Without accountability, you can't move forward.
And I know you're a Terry McAuliffe supporter, so let me ask you about this Virginia race, which is becoming a national race. There's just no question about it. I want to go to an event that happened last week. You probably noticed this. It was a rally for Glenn Youngkin, the Republican candidate who's challenging Terry McAuliffe. And at that event, they pledged allegiance to an American flag that they claimed was used or carried during the January 6th insurrection. What was your response when you saw that?
He's disqualified. He's an extremist. He has no place leading the Commonwealth of Virginia. In fact, he's certainly not the best suited to lead the Commonwealth of Virginia. We have a former governor that's running for another term. He's ready to govern on day one. He's ready to advance the interests of the Commonwealth, the population of the Commonwealth of Virginia. He's ready to make sure that we continue to move in the right direction with regards to law enforcement, like he did under his first tenure, with regards to economic prosperity. The only people that Youngkin has served so far are himself.
Why do you think the race is so close right now? Why does Terry McAuliffe need Barack Obama, Joe Biden, Mrs. Biden? Why does he need all of these high-flying surrogates, folks like yourself, out there campaigning on his behalf, if it's such an open and shut case as you're saying? I
think what he's preying on fears. And we know that fears are a much, much bigger motivator than the hopes and beliefs in prosperity. His slogans about, a critical race theory, which is, there's no substance to it. Critical race theory is not being taught in school. It's about mask mandates and that undermining the validity of the impact of COVID on the Commonwealth of Virginia. On law enforcement, where he has no executive experience and is not prepared to govern the way Terry McAuliffe is, but he's still preying on, these are the typical slogans that we heard out of President Trump, out of other acolytes, and that's what he's preying on.
And do you think that if Youngkin wins this race, that this starts to pave the way, starts to clear the path for Donald Trump to run for another term in office? What worries you about that?
Absolutely. I think this is a bellwether. I think just the way we considered the recall in California a bellwether, if Larry Elder had won that one, then we would be talking about probably a different set of circumstances, a different environment. But this is another critical moment. If a Trump acolyte wins in Virginia, a purple state that's moving in the direction of progressive, moving in the direction of, frankly, progress, not progressive, just in terms of progress, being more inclusive, more representative, and there's a reversal there, I think that sets a template. I think we need to defeat Glenn Youngkin because he is a Trump supporter. He represents Trump's policies. He's not prepared to govern. Terry McAuliffe is. That's who I encourage people to vote for.
It is Monday, the 18th of October of 2021, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English Bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef. And our daily special is River City Hash Mondays. Yes, it's Monday. We made it through the weekend, though we should acknowledge the weekends now aren't nearly as horrible and terrible as they used to be for 4 years, and you know what I'm talking about. So, they're still trying to blame Joe for everything. Oh, yeah, well, at least he should be equally at fault for everything, at least. Yeah, I wish that they would have, aimed their ire. Yes, we're going to be using that kind of language today. Aim their ire at, that guy. That guy. He's not a former guy. He's still a guy. But that guy. Oh my God. Okay, so the big news, obviously, is the passing of Colin Powell. Colin Powell. Anyway, the right wing immediately jumped on the fact that he was fully vaxxed. His family acknowledged that he was fully vaxxed. But he was also immunocompromised. That's why we need vaccine mandates. That's why you wear a mask around immunocompromised people, even before this conflagration of disease. Contagion. A conflagration of contagions. Yeah, so the unvaxxed killed Colin Powell with COVID because he was immunocompromised. People. Yeah, they'll glom onto anything to, prove a point. Well, even your right-wing, well, some people would say he wasn't right-wing, but I do. S.I. Hayakawa, remember him? Yeah, wrote the Bible on logic and semantics. Come on. He called what is happening now with, as an example of these right-wingers and anti-vaxxers glomming on to the fact that Powell was fully vaxxed and he still died of COVID. They're pulling at straws. They're packing their basket with straws. See, here's another one. Here's another one. Here's another point I can put in my basket of little tidbits of facts. Yeah, well, life is not the game of Jeopardy or Double Jeopardy or even Final Jeopardy. It's a lot more nuanced. Anyway, the anti-vaxxers continue to, when I say anti-vaxxers, that's a lazy term for a whole spectrum of, there's no other way to put it, idiocy. And with idiocy, especially when they've been amassing a lot of small arms. And when I say small arms, I mean like 50 calibers and below. Okay? Oh, yeah, well, it's for our personal protection. No, it's not. It's so that you can intimidate your neighbors with the fact that you have the guns and you're flying that black American flag. What's that all about? Oh! Now we know there's a historical reason for it. You're not going to put up with any of these Northerners telling you what to do with your slaves, your property. Property is king. Unfortunately, in a representative democracy, we're not supposed to have kings. Okay? Every man's home is his castle? Sure it is. Why do you have a gun and why are you pointing at me? Because I voted for Joe. Because in your fevered brain, You think that we're like a cabal of Satanists and we're eating babies after we've abducted them from, I don't know, wherever, the basement of Comet Pizza. The facts don't matter to the know-nothings. The know-nothings know everything, and they're going to make sure you know it or else. I'm going to beat that horse for a while, too. Just watch. Okay, Mondays. Made it to Monday. Now we got a whole week ahead of us. Oh, yeah, well, we still have to put up with Joe Manchin and his means testing. You know, that guy's got a lot of nerve to talk about means testing. How about means testing his data? Huh? Hell, how about means testing him? Did he make that proclamation from the fantail of his yacht? It is not a houseboat. Houseboats don't have those big old GM V8s, gas or diesel. I bet you it's gas. They have a lot more power. I'm just saying. Just saying. He's not going to use diesel. He's an oil man. I'm just saying. Anyway, Joe Manchin is going to be Ms. Manners. Yeah. If you're making $60K in a family for a year, you're going to have to prove that you're a responsible human being. No, you don't. I mean, it's insane. It is absolutely insane. It's a child tax credit. I thought that was supposed. We're talking about the kids. Joe answers to a higher power. Yeah. And I'm going to tell you, it ain't kosher. And all puns intended. Well, we could go on about that, but I suppose we could fall back on the fact that we do have a curated part of the show so that we have a semblance of order. A semblance. So at the top, that was Col Vindman, and he noted that Trump has not been held accountable for his attempts to steal the 2020 presidential election. And, as Vindman said, this is a direct quote, he should suffer the consequences. That's the quote. Of course, we all agree with that. We all know that. It's just nice to hear Col Vindman say it because he was right there in the middle of it. Suffered the consequences himself. So did his brother. How is it that Flynn's brother is commanding the command in the Pacific? How is that? And Vindman's brother got run out of the military too because this guy testified truthfully in front of a hearing. He followed the law. Whereas Flynn's brother was he part of the military delay? Just wondering. Anyway, on the rest of the menu, Bitcoin mining power plants raise the ire. Told you we're going to use that word. Raise the ire of environmentalists. Yeah. They get these old power plants, coal-fired in some cases, and fire them back up so that they can mine for bitcoins. Okay. There's gold in them power plants. The aging South Texas water system meets a growing population. Everybody wants to move to Texas. I don't know why. Jesus, the water table is salty anyway. And at least 13 auto safety rules are years overdue. Probably because, when the Republicans are in power, they don't lead. They're there to make sure that government is dismantled because I guess at heart, they are anarchists. After the break, we move to the chef's table where the University of Tennessee at Knoxville has offered to reinstate a tenured professor who was acquitted of ties to China. And France commemorated the 1961 massacre of Algerians in the streets of Paris. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is our chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln, of course. And thank you, Kelly, for doing so. And also thank you to Kelly and Ricky for taking care of Netroots Nation 21 this year. We still have content coming from that confab, so stay tuned for that. Mostly on the weekends is when we'll play it, so do stay tuned. If you would look across the page at our homepage at netrootsradio.com, near the bottom there, you'll also notice our Patreon link. And, of course, that's there because, well, it's an acknowledgement that, yes, we need help paying our bills. I'm sorry, but we do. Since, though the bulk of what we do here comes out of our own wallets, we would be unable to do it without you, because you are our biggest contributor. I bet you've heard that before. Anyway, if you could afford an espresso-type coffee drink, and if you could afford to send those funds to us once a month, we pool that money with what we have out of our own wallets. We stretch those dollars beyond compare, because you gotta. And the bills keep going up, and we got to keep stretching. And when we pay our bills, surprisingly, we're able to fly under the radar and continue doing what we do. And what are we doing? Well, it's hopefully an entertaining way to resist the Nazi takeover of America. At least. But thank you for your generosity. We've been doing this for 10 years. Handcrafted programming. Yeah, and that doesn't mean that it's, a couple of cans with a string, though some tech people might say that it is the equivalent. Anyway, they've tried to stop us, but we refuse because we have a civic duty, and our civic duty is to, I don't know. I think that it's important to keep the Nazis at bay for as long as we can, until help arrives. Okay, so thank you for your generosity, truly, all kidding aside. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, it is so simple. You go to @NetrootsRadio. Tom takes care of that. Thanks, Tom. And thanks for everything else as well. Follow me on Twitter. I suggest that you do. And you can follow me on Twitter @JusticePutnam. Now, why do I suggest that you follow me on Twitter? Because I'll tell you why. I post the show notes and links diary, and that's where the important reportage is. On Daily Co's about 10 minutes before showtime, and then I really try to get it linked up before showtime. Sometimes it's a little after. Sometimes it's during the clip at the top. Anyway, you can find that at Justice Putnam, and those show notes and links are very important, as I said, because the real reportage is there. And so do that, okay? And then you can also follow the show on Twitter. It's Monday. You can follow the show on Twitter @CookbookWest. And do please pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. Okay. Yeah, it's Monday. Ramblin' Monday. Well, every day's rambling lately. But that's the way these things progress. All right, back to the order at hand. This first offering here in the Bistro Cafe, part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, is from the Associated Press by Michael Hill. An obstacle to large-scale Bitcoin mining is finding enough cheap energy to run the huge power-gobbling computer arrays that create and transact cryptocurrency. One mining operation in central New York came up with a novel solution that has alarmed environmentalists. It's using its own power plant. Green Ridge Generation runs a once mothballed plant near the shore of Seneca Lake in the Finger Lakes region to produce about 44 megawatts to run 15,300 computer servers, plus additional electricity it sends to the state's power grid. The megawatts dedicated to Bitcoin might be enough electricity to power more than 35,000 homes. Proponents call it a competitive way to mine increasingly popular cryptocurrencies without putting a drain on the existing power grid. Environmentalists see the plant as a climate threat, which it is. They fear a wave of resurrected fossil fuel plants pumping out greenhouse gases more for private profit than public good. Seeing Green Ridge as a test case, they are asking the state to deny the renewal of the plant's air quality permit and put the brakes on similar projects. The current state of our climate demands action on cryptocurrency mining, said Liz Moran of Earth Justice. We are jeopardizing the state's ability to meet our climate goals, and we set the stage for the rest of the country as a result. The former coal plant, in a touristy region known for its glacial lakes and Riesling wines, was converted to natural gas by Green Ridge and began producing electricity in 2017. Bitcoin mining at the plant, which has a 106 megawatt capacity, started in earnest last year. The company said it was, quote, bringing a piece of the world's digital future, end quote, to upstate New York. Bitcoin miners unlock bitcoins by solving complex, unique puzzles. As the value of Bitcoin goes up, the puzzles become increasingly more difficult, and it requires more computer power to solve them. Estimates on how much energy Bitcoin uses vary. Green Ridge said it mined 729 Bitcoins over 3 months, ending on September 30th. The value of cryptocurrency fluctuates, and on Friday, one Bitcoin was worth almost $60,000. Opponents are frustrated that Green Ridge applied to run a power plant but are now operating a mine that is taking up more of the plant's power. Green Ridge says mining was not part of the plan when the plant came back online, and note they continue to provide power to the grid. From January through June, Green Ridge said it used 58% of its power for mining. Supporters see it as an economic boon in a part of upstate New York that could use the help. Douglas Paddock, chairman of the Yates County Legislature, testified at a public hearing this past week that the plant has brought 45 high-paying jobs, 45, and made a significant contribution to the area through tax payments and capital investments. Oh, you mean like bribes? Some opposition to the plant centers on the potential effects of its water withdrawals from Seneca Lake. But air quality issues have taken center stage as the State Department of Environmental Conservation reviews the plant's air emission permits. Green Ridge said it's in compliance with its permits and that the plant is 100% carbon neutral because they bought offsets. So that makes it better. Zuma Nashedam of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy River City Hash Mondays. On a scorching afternoon in South Texas, Sonia Lambert looked out at an open-air canal that carries mud-green water from the Rio Grande to nearby towns and farmland, losing much of it to evaporation and seepage along the way. That will be someone else's problem, Lambert said, referring to her upcoming retirement as head of an irrigation district near the U.S.-Mexico border. In the Rio Grande Valley, a canal system designed more than a century ago for agriculture still delivers water to the region's lush farmland and fast-growing towns and cities. Today, the canals lose as much as 40% of the water they carry, waste that experts say could contribute to steep water shortages in coming decades as the population grows and climate change intensifies droughts. State water officials predict that over the next 50 years, demand for water in the area's cities and towns will double. For decades, the town of McAllen developed at a dizzying pace, with newcomers drawn to a large free trade zone and jobs in healthcare, education, and retail. Between 1990 and 2020, McAllen and the neighboring cities of Edinburgh and Mission grew sixfold to nearly 871,000 people, according to the U.S. Census. Similarly, the Mexican cities of Reynosa and Matamoros across the border mushroomed after the U.S.-owned assembly plants were established in the mid-1990s. Further compelling matters is a 1944 treaty between the U.S. and Mexico that defines how the countries share water from the Rio Grande. Mexico is supposed to route 350,000 acre-feet of water every year to the U.S., enough to supply as many as 700,000 households. But it has periodically failed to meet those obligations, delaying deliveries because of drought, tight water supplies, and a thirsty crop industry in northern Mexico. The late deliveries are a source of frustration, but water managers and farmers in the U.S. are quick to acknowledge a major challenge at home, too. The leaky canal system that has long been seen by local and state officials as too expensive to overhaul. It's cheaper to waste it? The region's more than 2,000 miles of pipelines and canals, some 100 feet wide, are meant for large, infrequent deliveries to farmland. Common fixes to modernize the waterways and make them more efficient, attempted by many districts to some degree, include lining earthen canals with concrete and more closely monitoring water use by farms and meters. Another option comes with a bigger price tag: replacing canals with underground pipelines, which lose far less water and are better suited to serve cities. Since the early 1900s, a network of about 24 independent irrigation districts has served the area's farmers, cities, and towns. But as McAllen gobbled up much of the farmland surrounding it, some officials have wanted more control over a water district they say charges the city too much for water deliveries. Hope Yen and Tom Kreischer of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. After their 16-year-old daughter died in a car crash, David and Wendy Mills wondered whether she would be alive if federal rules on rear seatbelt warnings had been issued on time. 4 years later, with no rule and traffic fatalities spiking, they're still at a loss over the inaction. The teenager was riding in the back seat of a car to a Halloween party in 2017, just a mile from her house in Spring, Texas, when she unfastened her seatbelt to slide next to her friend and take a selfie. Moments later, the driver veered off the road and the car flipped, ejecting her. Kaylee died instantly. Her 3 friends, who remained buckled, walked away with minor scrapes. The 2012 law had directed the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, an agency of the Department of Transportation, to implement safety rules requiring car manufacturers to install a warning to drivers if an unbuckled passenger is sitting in a rear seat. The agency had 3 years to act. But the regulation wasn't done when Kaylee climbed into her friend's car, though it's been estimated that it could save hundreds of lives each year. It's one of more than a dozen car safety rules now years overdue, according to an analysis by the Associated Press. The ever-growing docket has become one of the biggest tests for the federal agency since its founding in 1970, when public pressure, led by safety activist Ralph Nader, remember him? You know, the Corvair, unsafe at any speed, spurred the NHTSA's mission to, quote, save lives, prevent injuries, and reduce economic costs due to road traffic crashes, end quote. Advocates worry that the agency has lost focus and risks getting bogged down under President Joe Biden at a time of increasing road accidents and reckless driving during the COVID-19 pandemic. We need a call to action, said Jonathan Adkins, executive director of the Governor's Highway Safety Association. He called the pandemic surge in accidents a car crash epidemic. The rules backlog would only increase with the sweeping technological requirements included in a $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure bill pending in Congress. From new breathalyzer devices that would disable a car if a driver is drunk to stiffer standards for reporting safety recalls. Currently, the 600-employee federal agency lacks a permanent leader. Its acting administrator is Stephen Cliff, a former deputy executive officer. The California Air Resources Board, which regulates auto emissions, a key component of Biden's climate agenda. Government should not take this long to act on safety, said David Mills, who started a Houston area foundation in Kaylee's honor, aimed at promoting safe seatbelt safety. The rear seatbelt reminder requirement is now scheduled to start moving through the cumbersome regulatory process in January, but a final rule could be years away. The agency in the past has repeatedly blown past deadlines, including those promised in federal court. Why is it that we haven't heard about the delays? We're hearing about 4-year plus delays. Wasn't there somebody by the name of Donald Trump, a mobbed up guy during that time who decimated all those federal agencies, especially regulatory ones like this safety agency? Why don't we hear about that? The mind reels. Trying to figure it out now, doesn't it? All right, let's get to our break. You can always read this in the show notes and links in its full entirety. All right, let's get to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, A Mobster's Tale. The Many Saints of Newark functions as an indirect prequel to The Sopranos series. It's a standalone story from The Sopranos, the hugely popular HBO series that has enjoyed a revival of late. Set roughly 30 years before the start of the series, Saints is the study of a legendary character mentioned throughout, but whom the audience never actually meets, Dickie Moltisanti, the man who served as a mentor to the young Tony Soprano and whose son, Christopher, became Tony's adopted nephew and protege. We never see Dickie because he was killed in the 1970s, for reasons that remain unclear. Having Christopher as the narrator is an interesting framing device because, as fans know, Chrissy wasn't exactly reliable. Nonetheless, his explanations taken at face value shed light on several characters and themes from the show. At its heart, The Sopranos was always about family, the ones chosen and the ones people are born into. In this case, Dickie, played by Alessandro Nivola, has what can only be called a complicated relationship with both. Ray Liotta does a fine job as Hollywood Dick and twin brothers Sally in familiar roles, and of course there's also the relationship with the young Tony, played mostly by the late James Gandolfini's real-life son, Michael. As we know, Tony ultimately makes his choice to go in a certain direction, but the what-if question remains. Michael Gandolfini appears to have inherited both his late father's looks and acting ability, and watching him work is a delight, though he's a bit underused. The movie is a revealing chapter in the Sopranos story and saves its best twist for last. As Tony might have said, The Many Saints of Newark ends in a way many may never see coming. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
I'm Teresa Carey, and this is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. Every morning at 5 o'clock, composer Walter Werzowa would sit down at his computer to anticipate a particular daily email. It came from 6 time zones away, where a team had been working all night, or all day rather, to draft Beethoven's unfinished 10th Symphony, almost 2 centuries after his death. The email contained hundreds of variations, and Werzowa listened to them all.
By 9, 10 o'clock in the morning, it's like I'm already in heaven.
Werzowa was listening for the perfect tune, a sound that was unmistakably Beethoven. But the phrases he was listening to weren't composed by Beethoven. They were created by artificial intelligence, a computer simulation of Beethoven's creative process.
The artificial intelligence gave me hundreds and hundreds of options. Some are better than others, but then there is that one which grabs you, and that was just this beautiful process.
Ludwig van Beethoven was one of the most renowned composers in Western music history. When he died in 1827, he left behind musical sketches and notes that hinted at a masterpiece. There was barely enough to make out a phrase, let alone a whole symphony, but that didn't stop people from trying. In 1988, musicologist Barry Cooper attempted, but he didn't get beyond the first movement. Beethoven's handwritten notes on the second and third movements are meager, not enough to compose a symphony.
A movement of symphony can have up to 40,000 notes, and some of his themes were 3 bars, like 20 notes. It's very little information.
Werzowa and a group of music experts and computer scientists teamed up to use machine learning to create the symphony. Ahmed Elgamal, the director of Art and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory at Rutgers University, led the AI side of the team.
When you listen to music generated by AI to continue a theme of music, usually it's very short, few seconds, and then it starts diverging and becoming boring and not interesting. But you cannot really take that and compose a full movement of a symphony.
The team's first task was to teach the AI to think like Beethoven. To do that, they gave it Beethoven's complete works, his sketches, and his notes. They taught it Beethoven's process, like how he went from those iconic 4 notes to his entire 5th Symphony. Then they taught it to harmonize with a melody, compose a bridge between two sections, and assign instrumentation. With all that knowledge, the AI came as close to thinking like Beethoven as possible, but it still wasn't enough.
The way music generation using AI works is very similar to the way when you write an email, you find that the email tries to predict what is the next word for you or what's the rest of the sentence for you.
But let the computer predict your words long enough, and eventually the text will sound like gibberish.
It doesn't really generate something that can continue for a long time and be consistent. So that was the main challenge in dealing with this project. How can you take a motif or a short phrase of music that Beethoven wrote in his sketch and continue it into a segment of music?
That's where Werzowa's daily emails came in. On those early mornings, he was selecting what he thought was Beethoven's best. And piece by piece, the team built a symphony. Matthew Costello researches creativity and machine learning at the University of Alberta. He didn't work on the Beethoven project, but he says that AI is overhyped.
Modern AI, modern machine learning is all about just taking small local patterns and replicating them. And it's up to a human to then take what the AI outputs and find the genius. The genius wasn't there. The genius wasn't in the AI. The genius was in the human who was doing the selection.
Elgamal wants to make the AI tool available to help other artists overcome writer's block or boost their performance. But both Elgamal and Werzowa say that the AI shouldn't replace the role of an artist. Instead, it should enhance their work and process.
Like every tool, you can use a knife to kill somebody or to save somebody's life, like with a scalpel in a surgery. So it can go any way. If you look at the kids, like kids are born creative. It's like everything is about being creative and having fun. And somehow we're losing this. If we could sit back on a Saturday afternoon in our kitchen and because maybe we're a little bit scared to make mistakes and ask the AI to help us to write a sonata or a song or whatever, and teamwork, life would be so much more beautiful.
The team released the 10th Symphony over the weekend. When asked who gets credit for writing it, Beethoven, the AI, or the team behind it, Werzowa insists that it's a collaborative effort. Suspending disbelief for a moment, it isn't hard to imagine that we're listening to Beethoven once again.
I dare to say that nobody knows Beethoven as well as the AI does, as the algorithm. Music, when you hear it, when you feel it, when you close your eyes, does something to your body. Close your eyes, sit back, and be open for it. And I would love to hear what you felt after.
Thanks for listening. For Scientific American 60-Second Science, I'm Teresa Carey.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1945. That was the day that Paul Robeson received the Spingarn Medal from the NAACP. The award was given annually to the African American with the highest achievement. Robeson certainly fit that criteria. He was born in Princeton, New Jersey. He attended Rutgers University, where he was an athletic standout and valedictorian. He earned his law degree from Columbia. He was a successful singer, as well as stage and film actor. He was also an internationally recognized star, with singing engagements all around the world. Robeson strongly supported labor and working people. He was also an outspoken critic of U.S. colonialism. His stand for social justice made him a target of Senator Joe McCarthy during the hysteria of the Cold War Red Scare. Because of his alleged communist ties, in 1950, Robeson's passport was revoked. It took him 8 years to get it reissued. During that time, he could not travel abroad to perform. The International Union of Mine, Mill, and Smelter Workers invited Robeson to sing at their Canadian convention in 1952. Since he could not travel, he sang over the telephone. The union then organized a concert on the Washington state-Canadian border. Standing on a flatbed truck parked on the U.S. side of the border, Robeson gave a 45-minute performance to a crowd of 40,000 people. He started the concert by saying, quote, "I stand here today under great stress because I dare, as do you, all of you, to fight for peace and for a decent life for all men, women, and children." Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
What does he care if the world's got troubles? What does he care if the land ain't free?
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy River City Ash Mondays. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 48 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting a high of only around 58 or so. We had a bit of rain overnight, and looks like we'll have cloudy skies this morning, becoming partly cloudy in the afternoon. Winds light and variable, and partly cloudy overnight with lows in the upper 30s. Winds remaining light and variable, and then a mix of clouds and sun in the morning, followed by cloudy skies in the afternoon with highs near the mid-60s, and winds will be out of the east-southeast at 5 to 10 miles per hour, bringing with it copious amounts of rain. Looks like we're having at least 7+ days of rain starting the day after tomorrow. Wednesday, Thursday, actually. And it looks like the lowest estimate of rain on a day is going to be about 1/4 of an inch. Most of it's going to be above 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch, and maybe even more. Well. Confirmed cases of coronavirus in Jackson County continue to spike. Now, of course, these are the totals only up to Friday, not... Well, let me put it this way. Friday's totals have not been updated, but they will be later tomorrow. So up until Friday, confirmed cases have shot up once again to 226,032, and the deceased went up another 8 and now stand at 300. Oh, boy. All right. Barometric pressure is rising at 29.99 inches. Visibility is at 7 miles. And relative humidity is at, 89%. I guess I forgot to tell you that ragweed pollen is considered moderate here in Rogue River. The air quality index for the region is in the good range at 36 parts per million, and the daytime UV index is low at 2. All right, weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that are crowdsources from around the world. London is 62 and cloudy. Paris is 65 and partly cloudy. Rome is 72 and sunny. Let's go to Rome. Kyiv is 50 degrees and fair. Kabul is 60 degrees and clear. Hong Kong is 72 and fair. Tokyo is 56 and mostly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 65 and fair. San Francisco, California is 51 degrees and sunny. And New York is 54 degrees Fahrenheit and fair. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Staff at the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table. At West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. The University of Tennessee at Knoxville has offered to reinstate a professor who was acquitted of federal charges that had accused him of hiding his relationship with a Chinese university while receiving NASA research grants, a letter obtained by the Knoxville News-Sentinel says. The newspaper reports that in the October 14 letter, Provost and Senior Vice Chancellor John Zomchik offered a tenured engineering professor job to Amning Hu, along with some back pay and payment for an immigration attorney, who also was offered $200,000 over 3 years to reestablish his research program, and an explanation of the university's support for his work visa as a naturalized Canadian citizen. Hugh was arrested in February of 2020, charged with wire fraud and making false statements. The judge declared a mistrial after the jury deadlocked in June. Prosecutors had filed a notice that they intended to retry the case, but the judge acquitted Hugh last month. The arrest was part of a broader Justice Department crackdown under then-President Donald Trump's administration against university researchers suspected of concealing their ties to China.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Arno Pedram and Sylvie Corbet of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Hundreds of people, including Algerian protesters and their descendants, commemorated the 60th anniversary of a bloody police crackdown in Paris during the final year of Algeria's independence war with its colonial power. The tribute march was organized in Paris to honor the victims of the October 17, 1961 massacre of Algerians, which French authorities have sought to cover up for decades. The commemoration comes after French President Emmanuel Macron acknowledged that crimes committed that day were inexcusable for the Republic. The move was part of steps taken by Macron to address France's brutal history with Algeria, which had been under French rule for 132 years until its independence in 1962. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up tomorrow for Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here, in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goer. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.